It's curious that you would have the TA Aztec on there. I personally think that's kind of cool.
I think it's awesome. I think it's absolutely awesome.
If it weren't for the flared fenders and everything on it, it wouldn't work. But with the flared fenders and the snowflake wheels, that's just pretty amazing.
I really hope it has the knurled dash inserts and everything.
Oh yeah,
yeah. If it has all that, then
yay. You know, there was a thing that GM actually did a few years ago. They did a kind of a hot rod version. It was kind of a medium gray, and had side exit exhaust and big wheels and everything on it.
Was it an LS? Probably had an LS in it if they did
version of the Aztec it was, but it was very cool. And it was like, you know what? If they'd have made that to begin with, people would have probably just kind of really grooved on it. Somebody actually ditched that thing a little earlier on the website, and I put on there. I said, they said it was still a vehicle. I said, no, that's not true. You know, by all accountings that I've read, apparently they actually drive really well and they're very reliable.
They're still on the road. I mean,
there's plenty of them on the road. They're kind of a cult car now.
Yeah, they are now. I mean, it's like, I think the reason why I didn't like it when it first came out is it was literally predominantly, it was very different, but it was predominantly a rental car. Like every racetrack that I went to, every race team in every paddock, you just saw 500 Aztecs lined up in every paddock when they first came out. And it was like, okay, that's a rental car.
Little wheels and the little fender flares.
Yeah, I liked them from the first day they were out. I even sought it out at the Chicago Auto Show when they were first showing it in the prototype version. And I think Breaking Bad may have saved the Aztec with, that was Walter's right of choice.
You saw beyond what everybody else did.
Well, the Bandit one, though, I'd autocross the wheels off this Bandit one.
There you go.
I would.
Well, I'm a
that
firm
would be my Concord to Lemons car.
I'm a firm believer the Aztec created this GT SUV four-door coupe thing, where you get the BMW four-door SUVs with the slope back and the impractical SUV there. That it might have been the predecessor to it, kind of like the I'm drawing a blank, the minivan thing from the 30s, the egg thing.
Not the Suburban, because that came out much later. That was in the 50s.
The Stout Scarab?
Yes, the Stout.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that Beetle look.
What?
Yeah.
Not the vehicle.
Yeah, giant, oversized Beetle.
Yeah.
Kind of like a Scarab.
Yeah, exactly. This car.
Well,
we're gonna go deep tonight, y'all.
Well, Derek, you guys have a car at the Corvette Museum that I actually used to own. And
really?
That was Arcus Duntov J2 Allard.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's no longer at the museum. That was a loan. That car was on loan to the museum back in the day.
Oh, okay.
But I do know the owner up in Michigan.
I sold the car to Steve Forrestal, who unfortunately passed away, and he sold it, I guess, to whoever has it now, who apparently did the restoration on it.
Yeah, that car will likely come back to the museum, hopefully within the next few years for exhibit.
Excellent. Yeah, I can tell you some fun stories about the acquisition of that car.
Oh, nice. Did
Which
you get it?
includes a rattlesnake.
Oh, very nice. I have rattlesnake acquisition stories myself.
is that kind of a barn find thing to harken back? We had Tom Cotter on last week. And
it was more of a field find.
I have a rattlesnake living under the hood of one of the ex-Talladega cars that we've got in a barn over at the race shop.
Ouch.
We don't get anywhere near it anymore.
That's seriously scary.
That car is now owned by the rattlesnake.
Fortunately, I just have garden snakes here, so the rat snakes here, so they're not poisonous, so I just chase them off.
Well, garter snakes actually are. Most people don't know that, but they don't have any teeth.
Yeah, so. Well, no, not rat snakes. We have rat snakes.
Yeah, okay. That's a little different.
They're constrictors. They'll just wrap around your arm and try to squeeze you, and you laugh at them.
I'm going to touch on, I said Tom Cotter, and as Sean and I concluded the interview with him in the last episode, you can go back and check it out. He was talking about a certain Volkswagen he used to own that he sold to a friend and had been thinking about going back and making an offer. Latest news is he is making an offer, unfortunately, in my opinion, or don't know. I don't know if we stirred up that thing for him to walk down the street.
The Type 2?
The cab and a half.
Yeah, man.
Oh, wow.
And he had it, and it was in perfect condition. He said he sold it to a buddy, and the buddy parked it in his backyard, and it's never moved, and it's been there 20-some years, slowly sinking into the ground. And of course, the asking price was more than the sale price, and it's literally half the vehicle.
Yeah.
Double half the vehicle, double the price.
The 62 Type 2 I had was an unintended rat rod, basically. It ran, but it looked like death. And that would be a $25,000 vehicle if I still had it today. Like, it's Type 2s bring crazy money.
Well, I'm going to surprise everybody and say that you've heard a lot of a little pre-show there. I'm going to edit just a little bit, but I think most of that's an interesting conversation for everybody. But it's no driving gloves again. I think you've heard a couple of familiar voices in Derek and Sean, and of course, John, myself. And we have Jim Simpson of Simpson Design joining us this evening, I guess. Jim's a guy that I've followed literally for years and years from some of his original Miata creations, as I would say. And I don't know, in the last year or so, following him on a couple of different Facebook pages and that, kind of learning more and more about him. And I just had to have him on the show to learn about his crazy mind and his things for design. But we're going to let Jim give us a couple minute talk about who he is, and we'll see where this conversation leads us to. Jim, it's yours.
Well, for what it's worth, I'll actually be 65 years old this week. And you're going to get to do the math along with the people watching the podcast. I actually started working on cars. I had my very first job professionally working on cars, working at a gas station as a mechanic when I was 13 years old. I was in school, of course, but it was primarily an evening and weekend job. But child labor laws weren't what they are now back then. So I've been at it for kind of a long time.
Something we touch on. That's how all of us on the show, and I think that's how all car people 30, 35 and above remember, is starting in the gas station, tinkering, and as kind of a job and doing that. And we've talked on the show, and we won't get into it much, that I think kids are doing the same thing, but they're just building and working on the cars on video games now. So.
Yeah, and actually that's something that's actually very cool, but I'll touch on that a little later. I went from there to taking General Motors sponsored auto shop in high school in Houston. And as I was doing that, I also started a formal European 2.5-year apprenticeship. In fact, I still have my notebooks and stuff from that. The guys that I worked under for that was a fellow by the name of Herman Krause and Hasso Schroeder. And of course, the very inappropriate joke from back in the day, so that I could remember it, was Krause the Kraut and Schroeder the Swede.
It works.
Herman actually had worked for Mercedes and had been a factory rep for Mercedes, and Hasso had worked with Volvo and Saab, and then ultimately wound up coming over to the U.S. Managing a bottle manufacturing plant. Or bottling plant, I should say. Anyway, from there, I went on to serve a 2-year Ferrari apprenticeship under Sid Simpson, who was no relation. Sid was kind of the unofficial mid-states Ferrari distributor. Most of the cars that Sid sold came out of Modern Classics, which was actually in Reno, which was owned at the time by Bill Harrah. And of course, a lot of people will remember the Harrah's automobile museums. Some people will even remember some of the projects that he got involved with, including the MoMA Mirage, which I'm not sure if he actually helped fund that or he was just going to be the dealer for it, but be that as it may. Went on to after serving my Ferrari apprenticeship, continued to work on Ferraris for quite a while, and my hair was considerably longer then, and I had the beard early on, and my moniker was the hippie Ferrari mechanic. I used to have a lot of fun. People would bring their Ferraris into me, and if it was a first-time customer, when they'd come to pick their car up, I would generally say something real smart alecky like, gee, thanks for letting me learn on your car. Of course, that always just elicited all kinds of, confidence in the poor people, picking up their car. But I had a fairly perverse sense of humor then, and still do for that matter. From there, went on to, if I had known about Art Center in California, I would have moved heaven and hell to go there. My parents were school teachers, and actually they were amazingly supportive of my doing car-related things, because they finally figured out at some point that I was probably not going to take an academic path. Although I did go to college for a couple of years and was going to be a mechanical engineer until I realized that meant I was going to get to do stuff that was really not my interest whatsoever. And I really wanted to design cars. And so I consumed every piece of information from just about everywhere I could find it, learning about mostly European cars, which I had a greater fascination for. And of course, a lot of the master designers in Europe as well. So a lot of my influences over the years have come from that. For the most part, I've been in business for myself, although I spent almost a year while I still had my own business being the service manager for Star Motor Cars down in Houston, which actually is the oldest Mercedes-Benz dealership in the country. They also had Aston Martin, Saab, and Volvo. And I oversaw the Aston Martin and Saab side of the dealership as the service manager. I was very much a hands-on guy. The owner of the dealership raced a Lotus back in the day, and Dave Portlock and I actually built his car and kept it race ready for him in his race shop, which was there at the dealership. Very well-to-do gentleman who owned the dealership. The dealership was actually a gift from his father when he graduated from law school. And the guy has
a nice present.
Photographic memory.
Yeah, that's not a bad present at all for graduating.
No, not at all. But very wealthy family. Anyway, that's kind of a long story. I worked for him for almost a year, like I said, while I still had my own facility. I finally got to the point where I was enjoying the job so much that I was pretty much drinking my lunch every day. It's the only way I could face going back in the afternoon. And on my birthday, I went in and told the owner, who I actually like very much to this day, that I was going to do something nice for my birthday. And he said, yes, what's that? I said, I'm going to quit. And I did. So from there, went back to doing my own thing. A few years later, I got involved in some other interesting projects. I had done a lot of sports cars over the course of time, restorations primarily. But there was the occasional time when we actually got to build cars for people as well, sports cars. Started out, kind of humbly doing custom Saab sonnets. There's an obscure enough car for you. And
but that's not custom enough on its own.
Yeah, like that's not strange enough by itself.
When you're looking for niche markets.
Yeah, boy.
How does one go about customizing a Saab Sonnet?
Well, generally you take a car that's been wrecked and then you modify it.
Well, the Sonnet was that a fiberglass car anyway, or?
Yeah, the interesting thing about the Sonnet, just to give you a little background on Saab, when they built about 10,000 Sonnets altogether. And I've even actually worked on one of the pre-production convertibles a couple of times at car shows, and have been very much involved in the concours world for many, many years too. And one of the things that would happen is Saab would literally decide that it was time to build more Sonnets. And they would literally shut down the production line and they'd say, okay, we're going to build Sonnets now. And they would build however many Sonnets they could build over however many days they determined that they were going to build Sonnets. And so that's ultimately how the roughly 10,000 Sonnets got built over the course of, well, from 66 through 74. So roughly an 8-year period.
Cool.
I still have a Sonnet 2 in my collection, which I actually had in high school.
That's just kind of an interesting business model to go with. We'll stop making at what would that be, 96s and 99s at the time?
Actually, 96s, 95s, and then of course the Sonic was the 97. And then ultimately they started early on in the 70s making the 99s, which actually were pretty interesting cars despite the basically the Triumph motor.
I really want the 99 or the 900, man. I love those cars.
The 99 actually had the Triumph motor, and then the 900 actually was still that bottom end, but Saab developed their own cylinder head for it. The downside was the water pump literally sat underneath the intake manifold and was gear driven. And replacing or repairing a water pump, you rebuilt the water pump. You didn't put a water pump on. You didn't just bolt on a water pump.
But you had to tear down basically not the whole top end, but you had to tear the top of the motor.
You had to take the intake manifold off to get to it.
Wonderful.
That was modified by mollified at least by the fact that doing a clutch job on a 99 was actually a very simple process. You pull the radiator, you took the input shaft out, and basically changed the clutch pack out and put everything back in. So you could actually do a clutch job in about an hour.
Wow.
Which was actually very nice. Of course, part of the Achilles heel there was the gear setup that went from the output shaft down into the transmission, and they were forever wearing out the gear sets as well. So that was something that also had to be extracted and changed. Fortunately, I didn't have to spend a lot of time doing a lot of that. Although I did spend an awful lot of time working on the 3-cylinder 2-cycle and V4 cars. I was one of the few guys in a 3-state area that actually would work on them. And in fact, I still have my factory transmission rebuilding jig for doing those. Later on, as I became more involved in other Italian cars, I became kind of the Lancia king. And we actually have probably restored and worked on more launches than anybody else in the United States. And I'm talking about pre-Fiat launches. Everything from basically the Aprilias on up through the Flaminias, and then later on even into the Fulvias and Flavias, and which my favorite of the launches happens to be the Fulvia. In fact, I'm in the middle of rebuilding an engine in my old Zagato at the moment. Which hasn't moved under its own power in 24 years, but that's another very long story. Wound up also doing some various interesting things. I got hooked up with a gentleman that I met at a car show in Houston, Kevin Hines, who owns a company called Special Editions. And a lot of people may know the Beck Spider. Kevin and Chuck Beck were partners, and Kevin and I eventually wound up becoming partners. He was also the importer for Puma. And I literally bought out all of the remaining inventory of Pumas that he had and became kind of the Puma king very briefly. And then ultimately we wound up becoming partners. And then eventually Chuck and Kevin and I, all three, wound up being business partners. And there was a period at which, because we were still building cars in Brazil, we were doing 356 recreations, ultimately Speedster recreations, then of course the 550 Spider. And there was a period at which I had actually put together more of the 550 Spiders than anybody else in the United States other than Chuck and his son, Randy. And
I thought you were going to say you had assembled more than Porsche, which
probably
is true too.
I may have driven a couple of your cars actually when I was with Porsche. I used to travel all over the country, and we'd go to launch events basically at dealerships, and everybody would bring out whatever cool toys they had in the garage. And as the Porsche Sport Driving School representative that was running the show for everything, everybody was like, "Will you drive it? Will you?" Yes, I will. I'll drive whatever you want me to drive. It's not a problem. And more than a couple Beck cars showed up with some very hot drive lines in them.
They're very sophisticated cars. Very few people are capable of driving one of those cars at 10/10ths.
Gimme. I'll give it my best. Not a problem.
My personal demo had a 2160cc motor in it, making a little over 175 horsepower. It was a motor that CB Performance built. They built most of our motors for us, starting with brand new VW Motorsport cases. And I finally wound up changing it out and putting a 1915 back in it at only 125 horsepower. Well, you got a car that weighs 1,250 pounds wet. I mean,
Yeah.
the horsepower to weight ratio is fierce.
Yeah, they were fun. They were lots of fun. The best one that I ever did was, oh God, we got to go. It was in Northern California. Can't remember the canyon that we were going through, but it was a long canyon test drive, and I had a line of brand new Panameras behind me at the time, and then I'm leading the caravan in a bet car. The guy was like, "I really want you to drive it. I want your opinion on it." I was like, okay. Not a problem.
Well, I hope there was a period in there where you stood on it because nobody would have been able to touch you.
Yeah, a couple times. It's big grins. Big
I used to
grins.
go out looking for guys in 911s and 944 turbos to dust.
Just to make them feel bad.
Yep. And then they'd pull up to you at a stoplight and go, "What the hell's in that thing?" You go, "It's a VW motor."
It's a 1776 cc. Lots of fun, man. Lots of fun. It's cool. I had no idea you were involved in that. Learn something every day.
We did that for a number of years.
So what year are we up to by now? Are we looking 75, 80, 85?
Yeah, we're in the 80s.
That's what I was.
We're in the 80s.
Because I want to say, I remember when Puma kind of shut down, and did they have an ad or something either in Hemmings or Auto Week or something selling the company? I can't remember.
Yeah, they could have. Although the Brazilian government basically shut the company down.
For some reason, I remember seeing a bunch of that stuff for sale. That was back when I was a teenager, and I, always fantasize, get a Puma, or that's when I got into kit cars and Bradley GTs and things like that. And I was just
Pumas
just
are actually neat cars.
I've always liked them, and they're pretty much a unique design. I mean, they are 246 Dino-ish, but they kind of are their own. I mean, it's a GTO to a Ferrari GTO to a 240Z difference in styling. I mean, there's a lot of.
Look at the real early, after you get past the Malzonis, which were front-wheel drive and DKW powered, and you go to the rear-engine cars, the first of the Pumas basically took a lot of their styling cues from a 275 GTB Ferrari.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy that actually designed the body, he was Brazilian, but he was from Italian descent. So, I mean, there's actually kind of some legitimacy in the way the cars were designed back then. But, that was kind of a fun period. One of the things that a lot of people don't know about the way that Pumas were built, literally in the factory, they would literally roll a brand new complete chassis into the jig where it would be clamped, and they would literally make two cuts across the chassis and slide the jig together and weld the chassis together to get the short wheelbase. And that's how the Pumas were built.
And were they built, I'm trying to remember, my memory says they were built out of whole Brazilian Volkswagens. The Puma factory had whole Volkswagens delivered. You pop the body off, and then it went, it wasn't that they were buying just pans from Volkswagen. They were buying
complete pans, fully mechanical, fitted, and with wheels on them. They were basically just throwaway wheels that would go back to the factory, but they were literally buying brand new chassis from the factory. What we call the Beetle was called the Fusca down there.
And they built those till when in Brazil? Was that, maybe you don't know, but 2000, something like that? Didn't those continue on? I know they continued on much longer than here, but Brazil was the last country producing new Volkswagen Beetles, if I remember right.
Yeah, it was either Brazil or it was Mexico, one or the other.
It was Mexico. It was like 2001, Mexico, yeah. 2001, 2002, yeah.
Yeah, that sounds right. Interestingly enough, Pumas were also produced for a while in South Africa after the plant had closed in Brazil. So a lot of the European sold Pumas were actually made in South Africa.
I wonder if that had anything to do with early Superformance days or.
No, I don't think so.
No?
I think this predates Superformance.
Gotcha.
It's kind of weird to me, the little South Africa thing, because I had a Brunton Stalker kit back in 2001, 2002. It was the 19th chassis he built, and they're well into the hundreds now. And Dennis has passed away, but he was South African, and you got Superformance down there that's South African, and isn't Kirkham an African company? And you just never think of Africa as being a car producing country, but they build some pretty cool niche vehicles and with some great quality. You know, it's just
most of the Series 3 Lamborghini Espadas were produced in South Africa as well. A lot of people don't realize that.
I had no idea.
I had no idea. I'd say I had no idea they were. I'm a Spada fan, but I've never dove deep into them. So we're here.
The Series 3 cars are not a bright point.
Well, the Espada never really was, and I think their popularity now is they, like the Mondial Ferrari, they were the cheapest, and they've kind of creeped up, and it's almost worth rebuilding a motor in them now. Where, you know, a couple of years ago they were $20,000, and you know you can't rebuild a V12 Lamborghini for $20,000. So the cars for
unless you happen to own a shop and can do it yourself.
I think you're still pushing it then, but.
No, it's interesting. I mean, I've owned a number of Espadas. I've actually had a number of Haramas. Had one Mira, and had one Eslero 6201, which actually was Ferruccio Lamborghini's personal car. In fact, I still have a copy of the letter and a copy of the title from having owned that car for a number of years.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing to me the significant cars you've had over the years, and that was one of the questions I wanted to ask, because you've had a pretty reasonable number of Ferraris and Lamborghinis, but you also dive deep into Alfa Romeo, and Sean and I have a close friend that's deep into Alfas too, but not the Zagato bodied Alfas and things that you get into. And then there's some, and you're into these anomaly things. So it's, is it, you've stumbled across the right things or been there on the right, dates?
That's been a lot of it. Yeah, that's been a lot of it. One of the things that actually enabled me to buy a bunch of the cars that I have now was actually selling the two Nardi Blu-rays. And you've got a picture of Blu-ray 3, which I designed and developed behind you. That actually is a steel body, by the way. And one of the things I really love, people, and this is off, we're going out in the bushes here again. One of the things that people oftentimes will say, they go, oh, it's fiberglass, and they kind of dismiss it like, and one of the things I love doing for people in my shop, that when they come into my shop and see cars, they go, oh, it's fiberglass. And I go, really? Well, hang on a second. And I go grab a gallon of fiberglass resin, and I grab some cloth and some mat and give them a brush and go, make me a fender if it's so easy.
Right. Yeah. Make me a fender. Actually, make me a right side of the car.
Yeah.
And now go make me a left side of the car that mirrors it. Perfect.
Yeah, make it factory.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Have a nice time.
Yeah. Good luck.
Making one side's easy.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things that, to kind of get off into that for a moment, one of the things that I have done for years, I'm actually very good at laminating, but I don't really enjoy doing it. And frankly, I learned most of what I know about laminating from Chuck Beck. Even though I had done fiberglass work on the Sonnets years earlier. But I learned from Chuck Beck that resin is actually the enemy in fiberglass. The trick is you want parts that are as resin-free as possible. So you want thin parts you squeegee the resin out of the measure, laying up the parts so that you have a nice, thin, really tight layup. And they're not as prone to cracking and warping and doing all the bad things that, really heavy resin-rich bodies do. And that includes some of the Lotuses from the late 50s up through the 70s, for that matter. We were actually doing much better fiberglass work in this country with the Corvettes. So Derek would certainly know a lot about that. And
I wouldn't claim that necessarily with the very first ones, but after we got past those, we did okay.
Yeah, particularly I started doing vacuum bagging.
Yeah, 53, 54, 55 had that heavy resin issue, and they solvent popped horribly because they painted them way too soon after they laid them up.
Yep.
And
they didn't understand curing.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, and if my video was on,
thought that was it.
I was nodding my head that whole time, but my internet's so bad I don't get to have video. So,
One of those.
We heard the rocks in your head bouncing around. So.
Exactly.
One of the things a lot of people don't realize about fiberglass is there's a process that's, again, that I learned about from Chuck Beck called post-curing. And if you can bring fiberglass up to a temperature higher than it ever has been, you can actually do a light bit of reshaping and quench it and get it to hold its new shape. So you have to be a little careful doing that, because if you get it too hot, obviously you destroy the fiberglass. But there is a process by which, if the parts are relatively speaking thin, that you can actually get away with that. So
is that on new parts, or can I find me a 74 Corvette and reshape a fender on it?
You can, up to a point. Those cars are really heavily...
I'm using that as an age example, not necessarily, because really a Corvette today isn't fiberglass as much as we joke about it. It's a composite of 8,000 different materials. So.
Yeah, they're very sophisticated. We actually had a C6 in the shop that I did a fender repair on here a while back, and I had no idea that all that was carbon fiber, but it is. And
heavily use of carbon fiber.
It requires some pretty sophisticated workmanship in order to be able to actually effectively repair one of those. You can't just slap fiberglass on it. That doesn't work. So, it's, there's fiberglass and there's fiberglass. There's a plethora of different resins. The cars that we have done, a lot of of what we're kind of famous for, and I kind of regret this in a way. I kind of became known as the Miata King. And the little car actually behind Sean is the Swift, of which I've actually built 2 of now. In fact, Chuck Beck was really excited when I told him what I was going to do, and was very supportive of the idea of me doing it. And I said, well, basically, I'm going to try to build a Beck killer. And he laughed and said, yeah, good luck. But he loved the car. He thought the car was really cool. And just to throw a little specification at you on the car basically is loosely designed after a Michelati design Lotus 11 that was done back in 1957. It was done as a one-off. It was an alloy-bodied car, used a Coventry Climax engine in it, and weighed in just under 1,000 pounds. Well, our car weighs in just under 1,400 pounds. It's a scratch-built chassis. It's all Mazda Miata running gear with an emissions-legal motor in it. Well, the car has a basically 10 pound per horsepower weight ratio, and it earns its name Swift quite honestly. The car is very quick.
1.8 car? Is it 1.8 powered? 1.8?
Yeah, 1.8
1.8 generation?
Yeah. And in fact, my personal car, which was the second one I built, even has a 6-speed gearbox in it, which is really kind of superfluous.
The car's beautiful.
I don't have the stones to drive that car as fast as it's capable of going. And I actually do have a little bit of racing background too.
I don't care where you're at. I have frequent flyer miles. I would.
Great.
I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid to use them. I'm just throwing that out there.
Come on out. You'll enjoy it.
It's not a big car. You can't sit 6 feet apart. But
there you go. You have to take it out by yourself.
Okay. That's
Back in the years when I was doing a lot of Ferraris, I had a 330 GTC that I actually used to club race. And one of the things that most people didn't know back in those days was I actually built a cheater motor for it. Venolia actually built a set of pistons to my specs, and we set the thing up like a drag motor. So it did smoke a bit, but it was a nice loose motor, and it also was built to 365 spec, even though it was a 330. And actually, the factory built a few 330 GTCs that actually had 365 motors in them, and were interim cars that a lot of people are not even aware existed. So there are actually a few of those cars out there.
I think every manufacturer does that with certain cars, and they slip out. I don't know whether it's kind of doing the customer R&D or such, because if I remember right, I think it was Sean, who's my friend, had a quote cheater type Mustang that was produced. They only built a few of with a motor.
Yeah, really weird. Like it had it came from the factory 30 over with 21 pound injectors instead of 19 pound injectors, and it was calibrated for the bigger injectors in it because they had a run of blocks. They had a run of 5 liter blocks that came to them out of spec. You know, there were a couple cylinders, a couple bores in each block that were a little out of spec. And there was a run of 5-liter Mustangs back in the late 80s that came from the factory as 306s.
Wow.
And it's rare, but they called it a plus motor. I didn't find out about it until I went to work for Roush. And I went to work for Roush in the late 90s, and we were talking about it one day. And all of a sudden, this guy was like, "Oh, you had a plus car," and I was like, "I have no idea what you're talking about." And he said, "It's a plus car. It was factory 30 over, 21-pound injectors, and calibrated to run with that. And that car on a short belt, bypassed the AC, on the gator backs would run 1370s, 1380s, and back in 1988, that was freaking flying." And like I had a friend that just got a Grand National, and he was so mad because literally every time we'd push him through, I would be half a car length to a car length in front of him going through, crossing the line at the end of a quarter mile. If he had another 30 feet, he had 10 mile an hour on me. If he had another 30 feet, gone.
But he didn't.
But he was like, I don't understand how a stock Mustang, it was an LX notchback. He's like, it shouldn't be doing that. And I know it shouldn't, but it does. I mean, here's the time slip.
The dealers knew.
I don't know what they did. I don't think they did.
Not.
I don't think they did. But like John was saying, and you were saying, I mean, how many times over the years has a manufacturer had something like that happen, and instead of just scrapping whatever it was, they just go, okay, well, we'll just do this and we'll do that. And all of a sudden you have what should have been a 225 horsepower car at the time was all of a sudden a 245-ish horsepower car. And I think back on those days, I'm like, 225 horsepower should not have been that quick in that car.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, I had one of those 5 liters in my one of my TVRs. Nobody would go for a ride more than once. That was a very potent, and that was just a 245 horse, injected motor. But it was a very potent.
The TVR weighed what? About as much.
Probably somewhere in the 1,500-1,600 pound range.
As much as that ginger ale can, right there.
There you go. It really was quite potent. And I still have a TVR Vixen in my collection, but it's just got the little 1,600 crossflow Kent motor in it.
That's still got to be fun. Kent motor's rev there, man. Good Lord.
That's a neat little engine.
Yeah,
and that car does weigh 1,600 pounds with a 1,600 cc motor in it.
Nice.
And it's actually really fun to drive.
I have to ask this just because we keep talking about. You keep saying I have one in my collection. How many cars are in the current collection? Just out of curiosity.
It's over 30.
Okay.
It's too many.
Oh no, you're good. You're good.
Well,
you're good.
Those words have never been uttered on this show.
You're good. If Jay Leno can do what he's done, 30 is nothing.
Jay's a heck of a nice guy.
Yeah, he is.
I'll relate a fun Jay story for you. If you want to talk about cars and you meet him, at the Concorso or at the racetrack, and you start talking cars with him, he'll stand there and talk cars with you for a pretty good while. If you want his autograph, he kind of wants you out of his face as quickly as possible. But he's a total gearhead. He's a really, really neat guy. My son and I were actually at Pebble Beach a number of years ago and showing a car, and I see Jay walking across the lawn, and he's got a Lancia Flaminia hubcap stuffed under his arm. And I hollered over him and said, "Hey, Jay, what are you doing with that Lancia Flaminia hubcap?" And he looked over at me and went, "Jimmy, you're one of the few people that would know what the hell that is." And
that's very good.
Conversation was not unusual, and had a lot of fun. My son,
we're gonna have you back tomorrow, and we're gonna act like we're interviewing Jay Leno because that's a damn good.
There you go.
He's a really terrific guy. In fact, he and Chuck Beck met under interesting circumstances. Chuck had the first Shogun, which was a little Ford Fiesta, which had the SHO motor stuffed in it midship. And Rick Titus was actually a little bit involved in that project. And Chuck was out driving the car, coming back from, I guess, Salinas, coming past the turnoff for the racetrack. And Chuck is not bashful when it comes to driving cars quickly. And apparently some guy in a 911 got behind him. And so Chuck got into it. And the guy tried to stay up with him and couldn't. And eventually Chuck stopped at a gas station, having forgotten all about the guy in the 911. And the guy pulled in the 911 and said, what the hell's in that thing? Turned out it was Jay Leno. Well, Chuck had no idea who Jay Leno was.
Did he buy it from him, or did he buy another one?
Because he bought another one.
Okay.
And he called me up and he said, who the hell's Jay Leno? And I went, well, actually, it's funny you should ask that. Why are you asking?
He's the right guy to be paying attention to what you're doing. That's for sure.
Exactly. So anyway, he and Chuck have actually become very good friends, and Chuck has visited him a number of times in various events and stuff. But no, he's a really cool guy, and a total gearhead. One of the cars that Jay and I share in common is we both have Mazda Cosmo 110s. And I kind of bust Jay's chops about his because his has a 12A in it, which is a non-original motor, whereas mine still has the 10A in it. And
that's old.
Very neat cars. I mean, his is quicker than mine because it has a more powerful engine in it, obviously. And they were very careful when they modified that car to put the 12A in it, so that, you know, everything could be reversed. And, you know, I give him total credit for that because a lot of people wouldn't have cared, and most people looking at it wouldn't know unless they actually looked at the numbers on the rotor.
And if it was me, I'd be like, I think we can get a 20B in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we could. Can we get a 20? How about 4-rotor? Will a 4-rotor fit? Yeah, I think so.
Probably not. I don't really think there's enough room in there to actually put the later 3-rotor Cosmo in there.
Well, Jim, I hear you're pretty good at bodywork. We could extend the nose, and we could.
Sure.
I think we can make it work.
We could make it a long wheelbase.
2 rotors are enough. I mean, Corvette proved that back in the 70s. I mean, they did a 4-rotor too, but they took that out and put a V8 in, and the 2-rotor still has a 2-rotor in it. So.
Yeah, and I think the 4-rotor was actually done by Downing Atlanta. I don't think it was actually done at Mazda. I think Downing actually did that.
Yeah, Jim's done some amazing stuff over the years.
Yeah.
Surprised me.
Another really neat guy.
Spent a little bit of time with him at Petit Le Mans. You know Jim well?
Not real well. I mean,
okay.
we've talked a number of times on the phone. You know, it's always been very cordial, but I've never actually met him in person.
I got to meet him at Petit a couple times. And
cool.
Really, really good dude. And
seems like it.
Yeah, really good dude. And everybody was scared of his cars at Petit. I mean, it's the only car that's literally blowing an 8-foot flame out the back of it on every upshift and downshift. And you would literally see cars in the downhill to 10A at Road Atlanta. Cars would pull out from behind him just
because they were worried.
To not get their bumpers melted. And it was crazy.
Yeah. Well, and I believe, unless memory fails me, I did some work for Mazda for a while as an independent designer. This was back in the early 90s. And in fact, the car that's behind you there, Sean, the picture that's behind you, was actually the very first of the Italias, and originally started out life as a convertible. And I actually loaned it to one of my buddies at Mazda and sent it down to California, and he was driving the car. And the car was actually a Miata that the factory gave me. It was actually 94. It was one of the first 1800s. And you know, it was actually the second Miata that they gave me. The first one that they gave me was the one that was actually a 1600. And when I asked them what they wanted me to do with it, they said, well, you're the designer, do something. Try to not get negative ink and we'll see where it goes. And by the way, bring it to Monterey and, you know, put it in our booth at the racetrack, which I did, not knowing that was, that at the time I didn't know that they had done a Ferrari tribute car, which basically was a Miata that had a cut down windshield and some graphics and basically graphic side louvers and an egg crate grill and some wire wheels and stuff. And I showed up with this little miniature kind of Daytona looking thing, and they put it next to their car. After the Saturday was over, they rolled their car into the trailer and left mine sitting there. And it was like, well, there was a career limiting move. Because I had no idea what they were doing.
Right. Was it career limiting or was it flattering? I mean,
no, it actually turned out not to be career limiting because shortly after I got back, they went. Well, actually, I guess it was about a year later. They sent the car that's behind you that was actually a '94, and I said, well, what do you want me to do with this? And they said, why don't you develop some accessories? And I went, okay. So we developed a line of accessories for the Miata. And then one thing led to another, and I got bored. And so I did the first Italia body, and that was the first Italia convertible. And after I let my buddy at Mazda borrow it, he was driving the car, and one thing led to another. Yeah, that's the same car in convertible form. And he was driving the car, and a guy ran a red light and broadsided the car, literally punched the passenger side A-pillar about 8 inches into the firewall.
Oh.
And basically the car was a total, and one thing led to another, and there was no insurance coverage on the car. And he called me up sheepishly and told me what happened. And one thing led to another. And I eventually had the car brought back up to Washington State, and I spent a little time putting the car on a frame table up at another shop, and wound up getting offered a job at the shop where I used the frame table, which I politely declined. And eventually decided, you know what, I've always wanted a coupe version of this car, and so built the first GTB, which is that's the car.
Can you see it full screen right now? Can you see it or no?
Yeah.
Actually, what you've got is you've got the Simpson design page on, and you've got a couple of cars showing, which is fine.
Yeah, I can't find a standalone, but I just wanted to pull up the hard top so folks can see it while you were talking about it.
And I still have the car. In fact, it's one that's going to get pulled in after I finish doing the full Vizzagato, and I'm going to freshen the car back up again because I miss driving it.
When you built that, is that a permanent hard top on it? Because before,
it is.
So before you called in, we were actually talking to Derek. He's an old Solstice owner, and somebody on one of the Fiberglass pages is selling out his final inventory of the shooting brake roofs for it, and I was wondering if that was.
Oh, interesting.
So
interesting. Yeah, I don't even know who that is.
Yeah, I can probably dig it up. I'll send you that so you can at least see.
The bottom picture that's behind John at the moment is actually Blu-ray 3, but we did a Miata called the Manta Ray, and there you go. And the Manta Ray actually is a car that we did after Blu-ray 3. I actually bought the prototype C package from Mazda, and that's actually a 1600 car, but it was the prototype C package car that was sitting down in the basement at Mazda under the design center in Irvine. And one thing led to another, and basically I cut the car up and modified it and turned it into the Manta Ray. And that, frankly, is the Blu-ray 3 that should have been. That's what I should have done. But when I did the car originally, I painted it Ferrari yellow because I didn't want people saying, oh, it's Blu-ray 4. For those of you that are Star Trek fans, you may recall Leonard Nimoy at one point wrote a book called I Am Not Spock. Mm-hmm. And then eventually he came out with another book that said I Am Spock. So I kind of embraced the fact that, yeah, actually it probably should have been the Blu-ray 4. And wound up taking the car back in a couple of weeks before taking it down to Monterey for one of the Pebble Beach festivity weekends, and repainted the car in Blu-ray colors. And then my son and I drove it down to Monterey.
You made a statement a little bit earlier that you said, unfortunately, or to me, I took it as you were thinking it's a negative connotation that you've become known as the Miata guy. But
yeah,
you're probably the only guy, though, that gets to put Miatas on the field, at Pebble Beach. I'm not thinking that's a huge category at Pebble.
Yeah, not so much. I mean, it's an interesting thing. And the God's honest truth is they've never actually been on the field at Pebble Beach, but they have been at the Concorso Italiano. In fact, when we first did the Miami Roadster, which basically looked an awful lot like a miniature Daytona, although it was stylized, and I did that intentionally because I didn't want it to be a replica. And we knew that Ferrari at the time was, being very litigious about people doing cars that were replicas, which most of them weren't anyway, and we're going after people. And we knew that if we did this Miata and I did this body that resembled, and we called it the Miami Roadster, it was very tongue-in-cheek after Miami Vice. And we even did a special set of decals and everything to go on the car. And we took it down to California, to Monterey for it was basically a Ferrari weekend. And Ferrari was the featured mark of the Concorso that year. And we literally got permission and parked the car next to a real Daytona Spider at the Concorso. And I knew at the time that one of two things was going to happen. It was either going to get people's panties all in a knot, and they were going to get all pissed off about it, or they were going to go, oh God, that's cute, which was the response I was looking for. I knew if they went, oh, that's cute, that we probably wouldn't get sued. So, the overwhelming response was, oh my God, that's cute. Look at that. It's a baby Daytona.
Have you ever gotten a cease and desist for getting too close, just out of curiosity?
We had one point at which, this is back when we were in Houston, we were doing a car that we wound up calling the Rhino GT. And basically, I bought all the tooling from Tom McBurney, the Datsun Z car project that he had done to make him basically kind of like a 250 GTO-ish looking car. And what I used to tell people would say, oh, it's a perfect replica. I said, no, at best it's a resemblant. The wheelbase is too short. The overhang on the front is too long. Anybody that knows cars at all is going to look at the center section of the car and realize that it's a 240Z or a 260 or 280. And we built 53 of those cars. And we had the car at the Carlisle show, and I got interviewed by somebody from Auto Week magazine, and they did a nice feature on the car. And one of the questions I got was, are you worried about getting sued by Ferrari? And my comment, which got posted in the magazine article, was, let's just say I'm a huge coward, and if Ferrari wants to get their panties in a knot and they want to sue me over the car, my livelihood doesn't depend on this. I'll quit in a heartbeat. I don't honestly care. If I don't build another one, it doesn't matter to me one way or the other. And we did get a call from a guy at one point, and he kept going on and on and on about what an absolutely perfect replica it was, and could we put Ferrari badges on it for him and all that. And I said, no, honestly,
no.
We can't, but we won't, because that's called trademark infringement.
Right.
And I said, if you want to go out and buy Chevrolet badges or BMW badges and bolt them on the car yourself, that's up to you. But when you go to sell the car, if somebody decides that you've tried to pull the wool over their eyes, I said, you're going to get sued for, basically fraud. And I said, and that's something we won't engage in. So I said, we're not interested in doing that. He said, no, but you could make it perfect. And I said, no, it'll never be perfect. It doesn't even come close.
Didn't want to, don't want to.
Yeah, didn't want to, don't want to. And I mean, and all the cars that we've done on Miatas have at best captured the feel and flavor of a lot of our favorite cars. One of the things I love is as people looked at the Manta Ray at shows, and I would have people say, oh God, I see 69 Camaro in the rear fender. And I go, okay. Other people would look at the Italian and go, oh my God, it looks just like an Opel GT.
Okay. I'm sitting. I'm looking at the Italia 2 right now, and that might be my favorite one of the bunch. And
well, thank you. It is mine as well. In fact, if you go to the Italia 2 on the website and you pull up the GTC, that was a car that I actually built for myself. And the influence for that design was actually a car that I worked on during my Ferrari apprenticeship. That was a 330 GTC that Pininfarina built for Princess Liliana de Rethy of Belgium. And if you go to, there it is, you'll see it in blue. You'll see the Cove rear window. Okay. A lot of people look at it and go, oh, it's kind of a front engine Dino. Well, no, actually it's not. The influence of the design, and I was actually on my way back from Monterey driving my truck and trailer, and I had about 15 hours to think about what I might want to do next. I used to lovingly say that, part of the best part about going to Monterey is I get to spend time with somebody I really enjoy spending time with, me, and thinking about projects and what I might want to do next. And
so you've been self-quarantining for how many years?
Yeah, for a lot, actually. So the GTC, my favorite Ferrari during my Ferrari apprenticeship days was a car that at the time belonged to a heart surgeon in Houston, Dr. DeBakey. And Michael DeBakey was Princess Liliana de Rethy's heart surgeon, as it turned out. And she so loved her 330 GTC that Pininfarina built for her, that she commissioned one for Dr. DeBakey and gave it to him as a gift. During my Ferrari apprenticeship, he would literally send the car into Simpson Automobile by truck. Never met the man in person. Although we also worked on Dr. Cooley's cars as well, and he was a very nice man and actually came in to pick up his own Ferrari when we would do work on it. But Dr. DeBakey's car would show up on a truck, we'd repair the car and send it back on a truck. But I love that car, and eventually it got bought out by an architect in Houston, Robert Shire, who owned the car for a number of years too. So I actually got to spend a lot of time driving that car. But that was absolutely my favorite Ferrari of the time. And I kind of never forgot about it. And it also was done in a dark metallic blue. So when it came time I decided, I got to thinking about it on the way back. I thought, God, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to build one for myself. I don't care whether anybody else wants one or not. And one of the things that's fun, and it won't show up on the Simpson design page, I don't think, but I did all the original design work on that car in steel. And building that roof was one of the most difficult things I ever undertook, so that we could ultimately wind up making it in composite. And I still have the steel roof that I built that I took over to the Fiberglass guys and said,
so you could build me one.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I have all the tooling and everything to do that project.
I wish that I had the ability to say, do it.
I just do it.
I find that car, it's captivating, but it's captivating. Obviously, everybody has their reasons why something catches their eye. I see the Ferrari in it. There's undeniable amounts of Ferrari in it, but from the right front 3/4 view, it looks like Alpine kind of got a little bit. It's the dip of the nose.
Sure.
There's some A110 in there, and it just like,
which was actually a Michelotti design.
As soon as I saw that car for the first time, though, I was like, ooh, it's got a little bit of everything that I love, and I actually have goosebumps right now just talking about it. It's one of those cars that I'm like, oh yeah, I could own that. It's beautiful.
If you go back to the original Italia convertible, and you can find a front view of it, hopefully you can.
Let me see if I can.
The inspiration for that car was actually a 275 Nart Spider. And the very first place I ever showed that car was at the Greenwich Concours. I had a booth, and I was actually the chief Ferrari judge for a number of years at Greenwich. Bruce Winterstrom, who was one of the founding fathers of the, go back to just the straight Italia, get out of the Italia too, because it was done actually on the.
You're talking the Italia Classic, right?
Yeah, Italia Classic. There you go. Yeah, there you go. You can see the front end there. And the inspiration for that design was actually the Nart Spider, which is one of my all-time favorite Ferraris as well. And a guy came up to me at Greenwich where I was showing the car and proceeded to say, I designed that car. And I said, really? How fascinating. And I said, the guy that designed that car originally, that the inspiration of this car was taken from, would have been Coco Canetti. And it was the Nart Spider. And he said, I am Coco Canetti.
Oh my God.
I hate that name. He said, it's actually Luigi Jr. And I said, sure you are. I didn't believe him. No, it turned out it actually was.
Wow.
And he and I became friends. So yeah, a lot of the inspiration of that car actually belongs to Luigi Canetti for having done the Nart Spider.
The world is amazing.
9 Nart Spiders built.
It's cool where we pull inspiration from.
Absolutely.
I mean, most of the stuff that we're seeing on the Simpson design page, obvious Italian influence.
Sure.
Is there anything else out there that like any other influences that you pulled in from outside of Italy, or is it primarily Italian is what sparks your passion?
It's mostly Italian because that is where my passion lies. I mean, the Italian masters of the 50s and 60s, I mean, even back into the 40s, but the Italian masters of that was really the golden age of design in Italy. And I actually got to go to Italy last May. My wife and I took a trip over and got to see a lot of museums, got to visit a lot of things, and actually wound up getting a private tour at Ital Design, which was just magical. And we also got a private tour at CIMI, which is actually a school of design, which Giugiaro actually has been one of the supporters of. I didn't get to meet Giugiaro, but I certainly got to meet Costanza, who is the director of CIMI, who's an amazing designer in his own right. And in fact, the recreation of the Momo Mirage was a car that Costanza was very much involved in doing his apprenticeship. And he was quite shocked when I saw a small picture hanging on the wall. And it was a picture of a small piece of the Momo Mirage. And I went, oh my God, that's the Momo Mirage. And he was shocked that I recognized.
How do you know that? How do you know that? Well, I've been stalking you for years.
Yeah, I didn't know that he had been involved in it. And he took me into his office and he showed me pictures of him as a younger man having been involved in that project, and a lot of pictures of the Momo Mirage.
That's awesome.
I was, of course, just completely blown away with that. But, you know, it was a neat thing. But anyway, one of the things that made me a little sad, and I came to realize it after we had gone to a number of different museums over there, was kind of the Italian heyday is long gone, and a lot of the great Italian designers are gone as well.
I think a lot of the designers are gone, and that touches on a question I was going to get to. You know, everything's designed by a computer today. Everything's, you know, pretty much generic, and however you want to make the aero work for gas mileage, and you know, that's all practical. The cars you're creating, even if they're on a Miata or on a custom chassis or using, you know, they're designed around some physical aspect of drivetrain or suspension components. You said that if you knew that the California Art, I'm forgetting the name, Art Center existed, you would have went there.
I would.
Do you think you would have produced kind of the iconic, because your cars are talked about, your cars, people know your cars. Do you think?
Which is actually very flattering, I have to tell you. You know, for the longest time, we were really a well-kept secret.
Yeah. And that, like I said, that's where I go back to, is I can't remember the first time I saw something produced from you, but it had to be when I lived either in Kansas or Illinois, and that's going back almost 20 years, even 25 years. And I don't think you would have produced the same stuff if you would have went to a school and been under the influence of the same teachers. And, you know, unfortunately, I think the best artists and the best designers are people, and even the best musicians are people that create without going through and being told they're wrong.
There's a lot of truth in that.
You know, Kevin Smith wouldn't be the famous guy he is now if he would have listened to film school instead of, or spent his money on film school as opposed to making a movie. You know, and I feel the same, you know, here is you've got your influences, but everything's influenced off something else. And you do, you know, we've spent a lot of time talking about the full size cars and the things you design, but on your Facebook page or on some of the Fiberglass pages, and you create some of the most gorgeous little resin models in like 1/24th or, you know, 1/32nd scale type things, 1/16th. And, you know, I sit there and I go, why isn't he 3D printing them? But you just have a way of creating a lot. So I think a lot of your designs we'll never see 1/1, but we'll see in a, you know, in one of those many display cases you've pictured in your office. You've got to have, what, 1,000 little model cars?
Not 1,000 in those display cases, but in my overall collection. I mean, my house is full of models too. And I actually have a couple of containers that are full of models.
There are people all over the world that would absolutely collect those. Like, if you turn those into not necessarily mass produced, but beautifully produced.
Well, and I'll just, you know, I'll give you this is a shameless plug. Most of my stuff is a little on the organic side because most of it's freehand carved. People say, "Oh, do you 3D print that?" Well, that's one of the highest compliments I could be possibly paid.
Absolutely.
And, you know, my usual response is I wouldn't know which end of the 3D printer to plug in.
I do. And I'd be glad to help you out.
Awesome.
We could definitely make that happen for you.
And actually, when it comes to having, when we did the Swift, I made a model first. I created a resin model, and I actually sent it down to Dan Palatnik, who's in Brazil. Dan speaks flawless English, which is very helpful for me because I speak precious damn little Portuguese. And Dan is an absolutely terrific 3D illustrator and designer. And he took my model, which frankly, most of my models are not exactly symmetrical. They're basically design models. And I did a lot of these when I was doing work and design work for Mazda. I would get given projects and I would produce models. I produced a lot of them actually for Mazda. And, the idea is to produce something quickly that can be shown to people so they can hold something in their hand and get a little bit of a three-dimensional idea of what something might look like. And it's something I really enjoy doing. I tell people, quite frankly, it helps keep me sane. And usually when I make a model, I'll usually make a set, because I do a master and then I do a submaster. And most times what I'll do is I'll pull a mold off the submaster and I'll make 5 or 6 of whatever I've done. And oftentimes I'll put a few of them out on eBay and sell them for, they usually start out about $89. And, sometimes they bring crazy money and sometimes they don't sell at all.
I basically also know the slot car king of the world. We could have you running around 132nd and 124 scale on slot car tracks all over the world.
Oh, sure. That'd be fun.
It's cool. And it does, like, your models do remind me of, I still have a couple of my father's slot cars from the 60s. Like there's a Cox model that I have of his that it looks very hand carved. It looks like that.
That was actually taken from the Cox model.
Was it really?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's stolen. That's purely stolen.
And it's awesome. But yeah, I mean, looking at you, I just stumbled across the models. I didn't realize, and that's why I popped that picture up on my background. They're really cool.
Thank you.
Really cool.
Yeah, and those are the ones that you've actually picked there. Basically, are all styling models. In fact, the one that is just above your left shoulder that you can see the convertible, that was the original styling model for the Italia 2.
That's awesome.
Now, the model you just showed, this is me looking at the irony of the show in the small world. It's basically, I don't know if it's a cheetah or inspired by it.
That's a cheetah, yeah.
I was say it looked like a cheetah.
Yeah, that's the third time a cheetah's come up on this show in probably 5 episodes.
What a brilliant car.
So for
they were just selling the molds and stuff, right? Weren't they just selling they were just.
I think that's a set of knockoff molds that were sold. There was actually a fellow that was this was while Dave Thomas was still alive. Was actually doing some cheetah replicas. And I met him at Carlisle at the Kit and Import Show a number of years ago. And his cars were very neat. And they were relatively accurate. They were building their own sewer pipe tube chassis. And they, of course, had, small block Chevys and stuff in them. I came very close to buying one to do for myself because I thought it was such a neat car.
It is a neat car. If you like sitting over top of the rear axle, it's a neat car.
Yeah, there is that.
If that doesn't bother you in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah,
doesn't bother me a bit.
Okay. All right, Don Garland. Have fun.
That is high on my list for a vehicle that the Corvette Museum is looking to acquire. So
excellent.
They're cool.
There was actually a really interesting design that showed up. I forget where. I'm sure it can be found out on the internet somewhere. But there was actually a design for a Cheetah 2, basically, that would have been a production car, a street car.
Yes. Yep.
With going doors.
Yep. That one. There was some work done on that.
Yeah, I don't know if I don't have that one over here. I actually started freehanding a model of that at one point. I've never finished it, but I actually started freehanding a model of it because I was so fascinated with it.
I would very much like the opportunity to drift a Cheetah, just because that would have to feel so strange. Your pivot point or your rotation point as you're sitting there on the rear axle and swinging way out, it would feel like an amusement park ride.
It'd be amazing.
Yeah.
And my understanding is the drive shaft on the Cheetah is
that
like
non-existent. It's basically
transmission to the rear axle.
Yeah, it's 2 U-joints.
Yeah,
it's basically
pretty close.
Yeah.
It's awesome. It's so awesome.
Yep. Nothing wrong with that.
No, transfer the power directly.
Yeah.
Give me all of it.
Yeah.
So where are we at, Don?
Well, we're a little over. We're at about an hour and 6. And I'm having a great time with the conversation, but we always ask an hour out of our guests.
I feel like we could go for another 6 or 7, probably.
It was really funny. A number of years ago when the Keels and Wheels Concours got started in Texas, I had Blu-ray 1, Blu-ray 2, and I also had one of the, it was called a 350 Testarossa that was actually built by Chuck Ron in Arizona. And I had that car there as well. And Wild About Wheels decided to do filming at the first Concours event. And the gentleman that was actually doing the interviews and whatnot came over and asked me if I'd be willing to be interviewed. I said, sure. And he said, do you have any problem being on camera? And I said, no. And after a handful of additional questions that he got kind of monosyllabic grunts out of me, he finally looked at me and he said, can you actually do an interview? And I said, ask the question and let me go. At one point, they started the interview, and he did, and his cameraman said, we've just burned through a half hour of tape. I've got to reload. And they did, and we proceeded to do another half hour, and he said, I need to reload again. Oh, and Blu-ray 3 was there as well. And so I wound up basically with 2.5 shows that were largely me.
Nice.
So
well, it's go ahead, John.
I was going to say, you're such a, I guess a wealth of car knowledge, such a diverse background. I mean, we could spend a whole show talking about your apprenticeships with Ferrari and your coming up and, establishing your business. And technically, we haven't even talked about your business. There's a whole nother show. Your designs, your models.
Well, I actually have 2 companies.
Oh, so now we've got 5-6 shows to go to. So what, I mean, I don't even know where to go or what to ask. I'm sure glad Sean's here and Derek's here to, help guide this interview. I'm just, like I said, I've always been impressed with your work, and I'm kind of at a loss. And to hear the story and the background, it's interesting. I was Googling a little bit. Let me see if I can share a screen. I've never tried this here.
It's at the bottom of the Zoom window. Green button, share screen.
Dead center.
And then you've got to actually choose which
there you go. There's the Miami Roadster.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. That's what I was coming up because somewhere today the Miami Vice Ferrari and In the Air Tonight came up on one of the kit car pages. So I talked about the McBurney and the history of the Ferraris on Miami Vice. And then, of course, I had to binging Miami Vice today. So
Tom and I are actually pretty good friends.
So I said in my post, and this was 4 or 5 hours ago at least, I think his cars are definitely the Miami Vice McBurney is a better looking car than the real Ferraris. And I'm sorry, Ferrari.
There's a lot of elements of it that are.
Yeah, it's just there's the lines, and the Daytona's a gorgeous car, but I don't know if it's the headlight treatment that he does or what's different about it. But I just think that car looks right, and that's kind of one car I would love to have. I've always said I'd love to have a C3 Corvette because I can travel the country in it, and if it breaks, I can go to AutoZone or Advance or whatever and buy parts for it. I can't do that if I travel in my Lotus or a Caterham or anything like that. And to do it to do it in a McBurney would just make it a little bit better, because I'm doing it in a Corvette that's really not a Corvette. And, just me babbling on, but I had to go dig up and see how you turned a Miata into a Daytona. And I kind of like that one too, but.
Here's kind of I'll just give you a couple of fun things about it. I actually cast my own grills for that car, and the bumpers are actually early Puma bumpers. The rear bumpers are in the front of the Daytona, and the front bumpers are actually on the rear. We didn't square the rear of the car off because the objective behind building this car was to literally create a body kit that could be done on the Miata that could be installed in 2 days with common household garage tools by somebody that had never done anything like that before. There's zero cutting or welding.
Oh, wow. How many of those kids made it out there?
3.
Okay.
And one of them has been totaled. There was a company in Japan that bought one of the kits, and supposedly it was knocked off in Japan, but I've never really seen much. And we actually sold some cars in Japan for a while too. But that was one that was kind of short-lived. The Miata was too new when we did that car. But I still have the red car, and yes, it has pop-up headlights, which uses the Miata headlight motor and a different cam that I actually built for the car. And that car, literally, one of the places it got driven to was Brainstorm Products in Atlanta years ago when I went to Carlisle. I drove the car from Houston to Carlisle, and then drove by way of Atlanta coming back to Houston.
That's a Miata. You could drive it around the world 3 times.
Exactly.
You'd be fine.
Yeah.
And the one major mistake I made with the car, we actually put a set of lowering springs on the car, which as an early Miata, it honestly really didn't need. And it made the car really stiff, too stiff, in fact. And most of the cars that we've done since actually have stock factory springs and suspension under them. And I've gone out on many a racetrack with Miata groups, and unless people have cars that have severely modified engines, they can't get away from me.
How much lighter are your cars than a factory Miata? How much weight do you drop typically off of?
About 60 pounds.
That's really all. That's okay.
That's all.
Okay, that's not as much as I thought it would be.
It's not a lot.
Yeah, I thought you were losing a couple hundred at least.
No, and one of the things I tell people is, one of the things you lose doing one of our bodies on your car is you lose that 2.5 mile an hour crash worthiness that comes from the factory. People say, oh, they're rated at 5 miles an hour. I say, no, they're not. They're rated at 2.5. So, and one of my wonderful sales tools, if you will, is, and when was the last time you planned an accident at 2.5 miles an hour?
No one's buying a Miata thinking this is going to keep me safe.
Well,
and if they are,
lots of people that have totaled Miatas that have walked away from them.
Yeah, totally true. But I mean, it's like, especially if you're going to track it.
Exactly.
Yeah, you know what you're doing.
So.
You know what you're doing. I'm looking at the Italia 2 again, and I'm the weird guy that looks at stuff like this, and I'm like, I could set that up for C Street Prepared.
Oh God, yes.
And have so much fun, and have people going, "What the hell is that?"
Well, and what's kind of fun, and a lot of people don't know this. I mean, at this point, we've done almost 200 cars.
Have you really?
Yeah, that we've rebodied.
That's awesome.
So.
Now, is that 200 Miatas you've rebodied? Because that was going to be one of my questions, is how many cars do you believe you've even built?
Well, I know that we've done, we did 53 of the, we called it the Rhino GT. That was basically our slightly modified take on the McBurney GTO. And then ultimately, Kevin and I wound up, when we split up our partnership, which was very amicable. Kevin and I are still very much the best of friends. He owns a company in Bremen, Indiana with his son called Special Editions. And they're still doing the Beck Spider. They're doing the Beck 904. And I guess they're doing the Lister as well.
What?
And we talk regularly. Like I said, Kevin and I have been the best of friends for many, many years. He wanted to move back to Ohio, which is where his family was living at the time. And I really didn't want to live in Ohio. And I wound up knowing that I was going to wind up moving to Washington State. And so we decided to split the assets of the company. I was just starting to do stuff with the Miata at that point. And I said, I'll tell you what, I'll take all the Miata stuff, you take all the Porsche replica stuff, and you take the GTO project if you want.
Where are you at in Washington State, just so the
We're actually on Whidbey Island. We're about 30 miles north of Seattle.
Okay. The slot car person that I was talking about earlier, it's a gentleman named Alan Smith. He's at the Scale Racing Center in Tacoma.
Oh, okay, cool.
And you and Alan would love each other.
Oh, sure.
you absolutely, like, seriously, if you're ever in Tacoma, check him out.
I'd love to.
You won't want to leave. Like,
sure.
He's got, I think he has 3 or 4 tracks in there right now, like big, proper.
Oh, wow.
We flew out there a couple of years ago and did 12 hours of Washington with them.
Wow.
And they do a 12-hour and a 24-hour event every year, and they have weekly racing. Cool. And I can't help but go back to your models and go, yeah, they deserve to be scale extrified.
Well, and every now and then somebody will email me and say, gee, I'd like to turn one of these into a slot car, and I'll send them a light slush cast body so they can do it.
Oh, that's awesome. That is so awesome. Yeah, you and Alan need to have a conversation. I'll stop there. I'm like making business connections here. That's not what we're supposed to be doing.
So the other company is called Contemporary Classics of Washington Incorporated, which actually owns Simpson Design. And that basically is the classic car side of the company. And if you go out to the Contemporary Classics, which is www.contemporaryclassicsofwa.com, you'll see actually there's a number of real Ferraris on there for sale, none of which I own. They all belong to one of my local clients, who actually is my best Ferrari client. And he's actually got a lovely collection. The guy literally is a billionaire and self-made. And he just really loves Ferraris, and he's got some really, really cool cars. That's his Daytona, which I got for him from a gentleman out of Cincinnati. That's his 6,500 original mile 512 BB. That's actually my Skyline that I sold recently.
Oh, that's cool.
There's my Cosmo.
You're gonna make me want to get. I'm getting on a plane. I'm getting on a plane. I'll see you tomorrow.
The Firebird was a rental mod that we actually did for a guy overseas that he kind of bailed on the project. We recently sold that car too.
Yeah, I'm heading your way.
You'd be more than welcome.
We need to hang out more often, sir.
If you haven't already figured it out, I'm a gearhead.
Welcome. I mean,
we were on the fence whether or not you really enjoyed cooking or cars.
I actually do all the cooking at home too.
I do the same, so I'm guilty there. But
yeah, and it's interesting. You mentioned music earlier. I've had basically a barbershop style quartet, although we're a mixed quartet, for the last 17 years. And the international barbershopping contests happen in various places around the United States every year. And several years ago, it was in Las Vegas. And I was also in a chorus that got to compete at international that year. And I got to sing with a guy that is an international champion bass. And we were woodshedding some tags and whatnot. I went, oh, sorry, that was really a wrong note. That didn't make a very good chord. And he said, no, there's no wrong chords. There's no wrong notes. There are just some that are more pleasing than others. And the same is true of design. And,
right.
One of the things that I say regularly to people that, that kind of get full of themselves on design is, you know what, there's no original shapes. All the shapes have been used in one way or another. What there are is original ways of combining the shapes. So a good designer recognizes that, they are influenced by any design that they've ever seen. And one of the things that I always encourage people that want to do design work, and I've talked at a number of different events, and I always tell people, a couple of things you want to think about, particularly if you're going to do a rebody. Make sure the greenhouse, because you don't want to have to start re-engineering glass. That gets very, very expensive. Make sure the greenhouse of the car that you're starting with is conducive to the design you want to do. And if it's not,
well, it's a good thing Will isn't on the show tonight.
If it's not, then you're kind of going to shoot yourself in the foot right away. A couple of the designs that appear on the Simpson Design page, we did an Aston-esque design on the 3rd generation Miata, which was a car that was requested by a client. He spent a lot of money having us doing that car, and it's influenced heavily by a DB4 GT Zagato. And in fact, the headlight covers that are on the car are DB4 GT Zagato. And with the exception of the windshield, which I talked him out of on that car, every other piece of glass in that car was made for that car. And we also did kind of an SWB, kind of a knockoff for him as well, also in the 3rd generation Miata. And literally every piece of glass in that car, with the exception of the vent window, was made for that car. And we spent $70,000 literally having glass made. And that was after me having made the initial tooling to send to the glass maker. So they had a starting point of what was going to wind up going in the car. Yeah, there's the Aston. And again, the objective was, he wanted an exact replica, which I had absolutely no intention of building. Although the grille material that's in that car came from steel wings and was the last DB4 grille material at the time that was in the country. And I literally handmade the grille surround and everything, and fabricated that center section of grille to fit in that car so that he could have basically a DB4 looking grille.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
$70,000 worth of glass. Is that what you said?
Yeah, but that was actually for the SWB, because we actually, we in this particular car, I used the SWB side glass for the side windows, and then we had custom glass made for the quarter windows and a custom rear glass. So it cost us considerably less than that for doing the glass for that particular car. The seats were actually made by a gentleman in Texas. Yeah, that's the SWB. That was the first one we did. The second one, frankly, was a nicer car, although he was very insistent that we make a windshield that looked like an SWB windshield. We broke 3 windshields finally getting a piece of glass in that car that, you know, basically sort of emulated an SWB windshield. And in fact, I still have sitting in the crate an original SWB windshield that I'd love to find somebody that wants to have.
I can't even imagine trying to create a windscreen like that, and
it
you're
was a nightmare.
Create it from scratch and keep optical clarity. That's the hard thing, is just keeping the optical clarity has got to be.
It was interesting to say the least.
Yeah, I just, some current manufacturers can't get that right.
No,
and they're mass producing it. So.
We actually got the second one to take, and I went home and had dinner that evening, came in the next morning, and there was a split down the middle of the windshield. That's the second one that we built. We actually built that one for that's the interior in the first one that you just passed up in the red.
Yeah, that's gorgeous.
And, you know, again, I took some license. The headliner in there was taken after the cars that were done in the 60s, you know, the pleated Ferrari style headliner. Doing the diamond tufting on the seats, all of that was hand done by the upholstery shop. They spent literally 2 days just making those padded sections that went down each side of the console. And you may have noticed in there that actually has an automatic transmission in it again, which is what the customer spec'd.
What they want, it's what they want.
Exactly. I mean, the guy spent an incredible amount of money having us build that car, and we spent the better part of 2 years building that car. And I mastered that body in steel, and then we pulled tooling off of it, and, you know, then built a composite body. Out of his over 100 car collection, that and the Aston were 2 of his favorite cars because he could drive them and not worry about them starting and running and driving over in the Middle East. So, a member of the royal family actually commissioned those cars.
Wow.
Ooh, the second one, that interior is closer related to a stock Miata 3rd generation interior. We actually built that car for a dentist that lives actually in Redmond, Washington.
I love the color.
And
I love the color.
That's actually a fleet color called Grenadier Red. And I love the color so much that the original Swift got painted that color because I like the color so much. And I'm normally not a red fan, but that dark red just completely captivated me. And I said, wow. And he wanted SWB bumpers on his car, which we he found a set of bumpers on eBay, and he said, well, I found a set of bumpers for $2,500. And I said, you haven't bought them already? I said, I can't make bumpers for $2,500. And amazingly enough, those original SWB bumpers almost fit our car with precious damn little modification. I was quite shocked.
So you have to be careful when someone says it's a perfect replica and you say, no, it's not. Well, maybe it is.
It's really not, although those are correct. They were also used on Alpha, but those front turn signal assemblies, which are glass lenses, were actually used on early Giulietta Spiders. And then, of course, the teardrop side markers were made by a couple of different companies. The original ones, the early ones, were all made by Carello. And then another company in Italy, ARIC, made reproductions of the lights, which have been used by many restorers on, Ferraris and Lamborghinis that they've restored for people. The last time we bought a set of those lights, I think we had to pay $180 for a set of, basically they were, Italian reproductions of those lights. But, they look right on the car. And
that sounds more than reasonable for
yeah, I tell people you only got to buy them once.
You can't build them for that. That's for sure.
No, you can't. And those front headlight bucket assemblies are actually Healy 3000 reproductions that we bought from Moss Motors. So, part of one of the fun things, having really been involved in cars for a lot of years, is I have a pretty good memory of the various componentry that have been used in cars. And one of the things I oftentimes say is the original production manufacturers of kit cars are Italian designers, because when they're making limited production cars, they're pulling lights that were used on more commonplace cars off the shelf, and door handles and door latches and things like that, which they don't want to have to produce limited runs of for a limited production car.
Yeah.
There's a joke or a story about Colin Chapman and Lotus, and that when employees would come to work at Lotus, they would park as far from the building as possible, because he was known to wander through the parking lot and see like a door handle or a tail light and take it off the car and bring it in for design purposes. And, it's just.
And why not?
Well, they're your employees' cars. But,
the tail lights on the Italia ones were used on GT40 Fords. Well, they were also used on the Lancia Stratus. And guess what? They were also used on the Fiat 850 Coupe and factory coupe sedan.
That again, a lot of my histories with Lotus, I spent over a decade restoring them and such. Everybody says, are the parts really hard to get? The body, everything else is somebody else's. It's off a Triumph, it's off a Healy, it's off an MG, and that's just it, is repurposing other people's things in a way that works for you, and obviously you're building gorgeous cars out of it.
A lot of people don't remember that the early Lotus Europas, the Series 1 Europas, basically had Lancia Flavia taillights.
Like the Series 1 Esprits have Fiat X19 taillights.
Exactly.
So it's
exactly. But then that's Giugiaro, and that kind of stands to reason that he try to pull stuff off the shelf in Italy.
But
I could sit here and talk to you for hours, Jim. I feel bad. I feel like I'm extending the conversation. So I think John's about ready to.
Yeah, I'm going to have to.
I understand.
We're at an hour 30. We might sit around and talk some more, but I'm going to go ahead and wrap the show up here.
Not a problem,
I think
guys.
Jim's been, fascinating. He's told a lot. This might be more of a video podcast than an audio podcast, and we have videoed it, so I'll release this video on the YouTube channel. I'll skip the Patreon or anything, but I'll put this on the YouTube channel so you can go back, because again, we're talking to Jim about design and little aspects. And
we've only touched a lot of this stuff, honestly.
So,
well, we're going to have you back, Jim.
We're going to have to figure out how to get Jim back, or I'm working on another podcast, and Jim would be an ideal guest there too. We'll find out.
Honor, guys. Thank you.
But we'll thank him, and I'm out of here for the night, guys.
Take care.
Thank you, Jim.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Derek always says a Z word, but I don't know if he's here.
He said that he's getting hit by a massive storm, so he may have
Oh.
actually. I don't know whether – are you still here, Derek?
Nope, I guess he
I
dropped.
think we lost Derek.
Yeah, so we'll say Zamboni for him and be out of here.
There's a wonderful reference.
Every show ends with a Zamboni reference.
Yeah, Zambonis were VW powered.
Yeah.